secret you keep, the one even you don't understand. This volume holds its true name. Welcome to LibCurio, Library of Curiosity. Shush, please keep silent. And now the next chapter begins.
You wake up, not in the alarm clock, teeth gritted, breakfast skip sort of way, but in the kind of waking that doesn't happen all at once. It starts as a flicker, just a sliver of silence between thoughts. Something blinks inside you. You look around and wonder, not for the first time, if this life is actually yours. The light hits the floor in a pattern you don't remember noticing yesterday. The clock ticks with an insistence you never gave it permission to have. You sit in your room, surrounded by objects you chose, but don't remember choosing. A book on your desk, a half-drunk cup of coffee, the silence between you and your phone screen. They wait like witnesses, and something strange pulses in your chest, something quiet and nameless. It isn't fear, it isn't relief. It's a kind of vertigo that doesn't make you dizzy, just untethered. Like part of you is floating 1 inch above yourself, watching, wondering, what am I even doing here? You've been living this life as if it were handed to you, sealed and pre-written, but today, something fractures. Not visibly, not loud, more like a hairline crack in a mirror, the kind you don't see until the light hits it just right, and then you can't stop seeing it. You remember being a child and asking strange questions. Why am I me? What if I was someone else and didn't know it? And the adults would smile or sigh or change the subject because the questions didn't fit into a bedtime story, because they didn't have answers they could wrap in a bow and hand you like a gift. You grew up. You learned to stop asking. But today, the questions return like ghosts who never left. And you feel it, buried beneath routine, beneath expectation, beneath all the little roles you've memorized. A presence, a hollowness, a voice without sound whispering the only question that matters. What if the life you're living isn't truly yours? You try to brush it off, make a coffee, scroll your feed, sink back into the hum of the machine. But it clings to you, this suspicion, this sense that something fundamental has gone unseen. You laugh at a meme, you text a friend, you answer an email, and all the while, something inside you is watching and not laughing. Because here's the lie. You've been told that your life is yours, and you believed it. But belief isn't ownership, it's camouflage. And deep down, something in you knows. It's been borrowed, scripted, glitched. You chose your clothes, but not the way they make you feel. You picked your job, but not the sense of emptiness that shadows it. You post your opinions, but they don't feel like they came from you. They feel rehearsed, inherited, echoed. You wonder how many of your choices are actually reactions, how many of your dreams were planted, how many of your thoughts are just secondhand smoke from minds you've never met. And yet, you keep going, because that's what you're supposed to do. Wake, work, numb, repeat. But today, you noticed the glitch. Today, something didn't quite click into place. And that's dangerous. That's where the unraveling begins. You stare into the mirror and something blinks before you do. You try to smile, but the smile feels borrowed, like it's been handed down through generations of people pretending to be okay. You start to wonder, what if your entire life is a performance you don't remember auditioning for? And what if the role you're playing, the one called you, isn't one you ever truly chose? What if you've been living inside someone else's story? You trace your name with your finger on the fogged bathroom mirror and feel nothing. Not pride, not recognition, just fog and letters, and the faint realization that the name feels heavier than it should. And that's the moment the floor beneath you starts to shift. Not physically, but metaphysically. Like something inside you just stood up for the first time. You remember moments, strange ones, that never made sense. That night when you looked at your best friend and suddenly didn't recognize their face. That morning when your favorite song felt hollow. That conversation you don't remember having, but somehow remember regretting. These aren't memories. They're cracks in the facade. You think back to the first time someone called you good, or smart, or difficult, and how part of you wrapped yourself in that word like a costume, afraid to take it off. Because if you weren't that, what were you? You realize that you've spent years trying to become a self others could accept, and in doing so, you lost the thread of who you might have been before the mirrors. And now, the mirrors are cracking. You don't know what's on the other side, but you do know this. If you keep pretending, it will consume you. The lie will become your skin, and you will forget there was ever a question to ask in the first place. So, you breathe, and in that breath, the world holds still for just a moment, long enough for something to shift. Maybe nothing changes, or maybe everything does. Maybe this is the first real moment you've had in years. Not because something happened, but because you noticed. Because you stopped sleepwalking long enough to wonder, who was I before the script? And what happens if I don't follow it anymore? That question, the one that sits behind your eyes and pulls at your chest, has no answer, but it's the realest thing you've ever felt. And it's only the beginning. Let's start with a betrayal. Not one committed by a lover or a friend, but by your own mind. A quiet mutiny happening beneath your awareness. You walk through life thinking you're the one at the helm, that the voice in your head is you, that your preferences and decisions are born from some core self, some indivisible I steering the ship with clarity and intention. But the truth, you are often the last to know what you've done. Your body moves before your thoughts catch up. You speak, then wonder why. You flinch, then fabricate an explanation. A friend says something, and your mouth replies before your awareness even arrives. And you think, I chose that. But neuroscience tells a different story, a darker one. In the early 1980s, a researcher named Benjamin Libet wired people to machines that could measure brain activity in milliseconds. He asked them to flex their fingers whenever they felt like it. The results? Their brains made the decision before they did, before they felt like they chose. In other words, the choice happened. Then the mind noticed. Then the story was invented. And this isn't just an experiment. It's a mirror. Your everyday life is made of decisions like this. Thousands, maybe millions. Micro choices unfolding beneath awareness. And your consciousness, the story-spinning narrator you believe in, comes in after the fact, dressed in confidence, pretending it was always in charge. This is the uncomfortable truth. You are not the author of most of what you do. You're the editor, and a late one at that. Your preferences, shaped by moments you don't remember. Your behaviors, etched into muscle memory by repetition, survival, imitation. The way you tilt your head when listening, the phrases you use when you're nervous, the people you feel drawn to, repelled by, afraid of, all reactions that predate your story about them. Even the voice in your head, the one you call your own, was constructed out of fragments, imitations, echoes of other people's voices, parents, teachers, advertising slogans, social media commentary, all stitched together into a seamless performance you call self. But it's not seamless. You've felt the seams. Late at night, in the quiet, when you do something cruel and can't explain why. When you repeat a pattern you swore you'd outgrown. When your gut tells you one thing and your mouth says another. That's not contradiction. That's fracture. A glitch in the illusion of unity. And still the story continues, because the mind hates a vacuum. It fills in the gaps, invents the reasons, pretends to be a continuous singular force instead of what it is, a chaotic assembly of roles, instincts, fears, desires, and reactions. You say, I always wanted to be this.
But who taught you what was worth wanting? You say, that's just who I am. But who gave you the template? You say, I made that choice freely. But what does free mean when the architecture of your decisions was laid down by forces you can't even name? This is the inconvenient truth. The self you believe in, the coherent, sovereign, choosing self, is more of a performance than a presence. And the world rewards the performance so much you forget it's theater. You learn how to dress, how to speak, how to laugh just enough. You learn which parts of you are lovable, marketable, acceptable, and you amplify them. You trim the rest. You bury what doesn't get applause. But the parts you bury, they don't die. They wait. In dreams.
in slips of the tongue. In the moments you say, "I don't know why I did that." You do know. You just buried the knowing too deep for comfort. And so you live between two selves, the one you present and the one that watches. And if you're quiet enough, still enough, you might catch the one who watches peeking through, a flicker in your peripheral vision, a pang of guilt when you laugh at the wrong thing, a pause before a lie. That part of you doesn't care about performance. It's not trying to win anything. It just wants to know, is this real? You feel the tension building inside you between the curated and the raw, between who you think you are and what you are when no one's looking. And that tension, it burns because it means you know. You know on some deep and unspeakable level that much of your life has been lived on autopilot, scripted, filtered, managed. And you wonder, what would happen if you stopped managing? What would happen if you let the mask slip? Not publicly, not dramatically, but inwardly. What would happen if you admitted, even just to yourself, that you don't know who you are? Not truly, not underneath the roles, the memories, the trauma, the language. What are you without a script? What remains when the performance stops? You've been trained to fear that question, to drown it in distractions, productivity, goals, content. You've been taught that not knowing is weakness. But what if it's the only doorway to truth? What if the story of you is a fortress and the cracks are the only way out? This isn't about despair. It's not about becoming cynical or nihilistic or detached. It's about seeing clearly, about removing the blindfold gently, even if it stings. Because clarity hurts, but so does illusion, just slower. And here's the cruel paradox. The more self-aware you become, the less certain you are of the self. The more clearly you see your thoughts, the more you notice they don't always belong to you. The more conscious you grow, the more unconscious material you uncover. The light doesn't bring peace, it brings truth. And truth is not soothing, it is sacred. Sacred because it burns away everything that isn't real. So what do you do with this? With this knowledge that the you've been defending might be a ghost made of echoes? You begin to listen, not to the voice in your head, but to the silence underneath, the space between thoughts, the wordless place where real awareness lives. You start to catch yourself, not to punish, not to fix, but to witness. You become the mirror, not the mask. You stop trying to control every thought and instead ask, who is it that's noticing them? And in that noticing, quiet, honest, reverent, you begin to feel something unfamiliar. Not a new identity, but an absence of identity that doesn't feel empty. It feels open, spacious, true. Not a story,
but a space in which stories appear and disappear. You are not the voice. You are the silence behind it. And that silence is not nothing. It's where everything begins. The modern world worships identity like a god. You are taught to define yourself by your goals, your job, your aesthetic, your opinions. You are told to build a brand, to speak your truth, to take up space.
And while none of that is inherently wrong, something deeper gets lost in the noise, the art of unknowing. Ancient thinkers didn't fear the collapse of identity. They considered it a rite of passage. Thousands of years ago, across mountains and deserts, in temples and under open skies, sages and seekers came to the same haunting conclusion that who you think you are is an illusion, and that liberation begins with letting that illusion die. In ancient Greece, Socrates walked barefoot through the streets of Athens, cornering politicians, artisans, poets, asking simple questions with devastating consequences. What is justice? What is virtue? What is the good life? His method was not to provide answers, but to show that people didn't understand their own beliefs. His wisdom came not from knowing, but from knowing he did not know. And they killed him for it. They called it corrupting the youth. In truth, he was dismantling the ego of a city. In China, Lao Tzu vanished into the mountains after writing the Tao Te Ching, a book so paradoxical it reads like poetry from a dream. He who knows does not speak. He who speaks does not know. He described the Tao, the way, as something that cannot be named, only followed. Trying to grasp it is like trying to hold water in your fist. The more you cling, the less you have. He didn't tell you to find yourself. He told you to dissolve. The Stoics, Marcus Aurelius, Seneca, Epictetus, lived by the premise that the self is not sovereign, that you are not your emotions, your wealth, your status, or your suffering. You are the faculty that observes them. Your only true possession is your ability to choose how to respond. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. Even the Buddha, 2,500 years ago, taught a truth so radical it shook the foundations of spiritual identity, anatta, no self, that the self you protect, defend, and polish does not truly exist. It's a bundle of processes, changing moment to moment. Cling to it, and you suffer. Let it go, and you awaken. Across these traditions, separated by time, geography, and language, there was a thread of insight too uncomfortable for most to carry. That your identity is not sacred, that your personality is not your essence, that you are more real when you stop trying to be real. But what do we do with this today? We live in an era obsessed with individuality. We are constantly told to find our voice, to express our uniqueness, to carve our name into the stone of the internet. We upload ourselves in fragments, stories, reels, posts, carefully curated moments. We don't dissolve, we duplicate. We don't empty the self, we multiply it. But what happens when your reflection has too many faces? When your public performance consumes your private truth? When the search for authenticity becomes another performance? Ancient wisdom did not ask you to perform. It asked you to remember. To remember what you were before language, before narrative, before name. The Greeks called it aletheia, truth as unforgetting, not discovery, not invention, just remembrance. So let's remember. Remember the space between thoughts, the silence after breath, the awareness before the story begins. Remember the feeling of being without needing to become. You once had it, as a child, before the world gave you definitions, before shame and shoulds and strategy, before the gaze of others taught you to fold into something presentable. You knew how to be without explaining. You laughed before you learned what was funny. You cried without apology. You danced without technique. You existed fully, without narrating every moment into meaning. And then you forgot. Because forgetting is the price of socialization, the cost of growing up. But the ancients never forgot. They built their philosophies to hold what modern culture denies, the truth that you, as you believe yourself to be, are a temporary mask worn by something deeper, older, vaster, not a person, a presence, not a brand, a breath. Even in myth, the lesson echoes, the story of the Ship of Theseus. A vessel that sails through time, replacing plank after plank until no part of the original remains. Is it still the same ship? You ask the same of yourself. You are not the same person you were 5 years ago, not even close. Your memories have shifted. Your selves have changed. Your thoughts are new. Yet you call yourself me without hesitation. Why? Because identity is a story told to bridge change. But the bridge is not the river. You are not the continuity. You are the current. Heraclitus said, "No man ever steps in the same river twice, for it is not the same river, and he is not the same man." And yet you cling to I, to permanence, to self-definition. But every sage would tell you, the more you cling, the more you suffer. Not because you're weak, but because you're gripping an illusion. The lie you live is not that you don't exist. The lie is that you exist the way you think you do, as one solid thing. You are not one. You are many. A constellation of traits, roles, memories, impulses, dreams, and shadows, held together by a temporary gravity you mistake for self. The ancients didn't fear this truth. They revered it, because only by dissolving the false self could they glimpse the sacred, the Tao, the Atman, the Logos, the awareness that isn't you, but is the ground of all that is. They didn't preach answers, they pointed to silence. And that silence, still, wordless, infinite, isn't empty. It is everything.
Once there was a man born in a small, quiet village where everything was decided for you. He was given a name, a role, and a story. From the moment he could walk, he was told what mattered. Be good, be strong, be useful. He was praised when he fit in, punished when he wandered. The elders taught him the rules. The children taught him how to hide his strangeness. And so, like everyone else, he began to perform. Every morning, he wore the same mask.
Not a real one, of course, but one made of smiles, nods, predictable answers. It kept him safe. It gave him a place in the world. People liked him for it, trusted him, promoted him. But late at night, he would sit alone and wonder, who am I when I'm not being seen? He never asked out loud. He knew better. That kind of question makes people uncomfortable. It bends the air. Years passed. He became respected, successful, admired. But inside, something felt off. Not wrong exactly, just not quite real. Like he was living in a house made of mirrors, always reflecting, never touching. One day, a traveler passed through the village. She wore strange clothes and asked stranger questions. She didn't speak much, but when she looked at him, it felt like she could see through him, like she wasn't fooled by the mask. They spoke only once. "What's the lie you live?" she asked. He laughed, but something inside him cracked. "I don't know what you mean." She didn't explain. She only nodded and handed him a small object wrapped in cloth. Inside was a mirror, but unlike any mirror he had seen. It didn't show his face. It showed something else. A child, alone, curious, fractured, free. He blinked, and the image was gone. Just a mirror again. Just his familiar face. But something had shifted. The traveler left. She didn't say goodbye. And from that moment forward, the mask began to slip. Not all at once. At first, it was subtle. A forgotten word, a hesitation, a look in the eyes that didn't match the smile. He tried to tighten the seams, to fix the cracks, but the cracks deepened. He began to dream, strange dreams, dreams where he couldn't remember who he was, where names had no meaning and time unraveled like loose thread. In one dream, he stood before a vast stage, watching versions of himself perform roles he no longer recognized. They fought, they wept, they laughed, but none of them turned to face him. In another dream, he was walking through a maze, but
every path led back to the same door, and behind the door, a mirror. Always a mirror. He started forgetting things, or rather remembering things differently. A laugh that used to bring him joy now sounded hollow. A routine he used to cherish now made his skin crawl. He couldn't tell if he was changing or simply waking up. The village noticed. They called it a phase, a sickness, a weakness. They urged him to come back, be himself again. But he couldn't, because he no longer believed in the self they wanted him to be. So he left. He didn't know where he was going, only that he had to go. He walked for days, weeks. Time stopped meaning anything. He shed his clothes, his titles, his practiced expressions. He walked until he forgot how to perform, until he forgot who was watching. And then, deep in a forest with no name, he came upon a second mirror. This one wasn't gifted, it was waiting. He looked in and saw nothing. No face, no past, no story, just space. And for the first time in his life, he didn't panic. He didn't rush to fill the void. He simply stood there, breathing, present, unwritten. And it was terrifying, and it was beautiful. Because in that moment, he realized something that undid everything he had ever believed. He had never truly lived. He had existed. He had performed. He had survived. But he had never lived, not as himself, because he had never known what himself meant. He had only known what the world rewarded, what it punished, what it asked for. And now, facing the silence, stripped of the mask, he felt the beginnings of something else. Not a new identity, not a better version, just presence, a flicker, a beginning. He sat before the mirror for 3 days. No food, no sleep, just breath and stillness. And when he finally stood, he didn't take the mirror with him. He didn't need it anymore, because the reflection had become internal.
He was no longer chasing the self. He was witnessing it. He returned to the village one day, not to be seen, not to explain, just to walk its streets with different eyes. The buildings looked the same, but he knew now they were made of dreams. The people smiled, but he no longer felt compelled to smile back. He spoke only when the words felt real. He laughed only when the silence permitted. Some called him mad, others called him enlightened. But he didn't need to be called anything, because the question that once haunted him, "Who am I really?" had dissolved. Not answered, just dissolved. And in its place was something quieter, something the traveler had known, something the sages whispered of, something no mirror could hold. And perhaps, in time, you will feel it too. You scroll, not because you're curious, not because you're bored, but because something in you is trying not to feel the weight of being. So you scroll. Video, ad, comment, laugh, rage, repeat. And somewhere in that infinite loop, you forget why you picked up your phone to begin with. You forget what you were doing. You forget that the feed you're consuming is consuming you in return. That's the thing about modern life. It rewards distraction. It gives you more and more tools to look away, to blur the mirror just enough so you can believe the face is yours. But deep down, something in you aches, not for more content, not for more productivity, but for presence, for stillness, for truth. And the world is not designed to give you that. It offers substitutes, likes instead of love, stimulation instead of meaning, noise instead of clarity. And you take them because they're easy, because they're everywhere, because choosing silence feels like drowning when you've spent your whole life breathing static. You were told to build a self, and so you did. You built it from fragments, quotes, influences, childhood wounds, aesthetic boards, rejection scars, curated playlists. You called it you because you had no other name for it. But the more you polished it, the more hollow it began to feel. Because identity in the modern age is a commodity, something bought, sold, branded, performed. It's not something you are, it's something you maintain. And that maintenance is exhausting. That pressure to stay consistent, to always make sense, to be coherent, even when you're confused, to be confident, even when you're breaking, to be interesting, even when you're empty. You post something honest, then delete it. You think something ugly, then package it into a joke. You cry, then turn it into content. And somewhere along the way, you lose track of where the mask ends and the self begins. You say, "I'm just being real," but you don't remember what real felt like before it had to be seen. Modern life rewards performance. The more digestible your persona, the more attention you receive. But attention isn't intimacy. It's surveillance disguised as connection. You think people know you, but they know your echo, your highlight reel, your mask with good lighting and a catchy hook. And this is where the danger lies, not in technology itself, but in what it trains you to believe. That you are only real when you are watched, that you only matter when you are measured, that to be you is to be relevant, and relevance is a moving target. It changes faster than you can adapt. So you chase until you collapse. Then you get up and chase again. And somewhere in the sprint, you forget how to walk. You forget how to just be. Still, silent, unfiltered, human. It's no coincidence that anxiety is rising,
that depression is spreading like smoke through every generation, that so many people wake up and feel like imposters in their own skin. We're not broken, we buried beneath layers of algorithmic selfhood, behavioral conditioning, emotional numbing, and collective denial. We've confused engagement with empathy, reaction with reflection, visibility with value. But when was the last time you sat with yourself, really sat, without music, without scrolling, without scripting the moment for memory?
When was the last time you were alone and didn't feel the urge to escape? The truth is uncomfortable. Modern life is not built for awareness, it's built for efficiency. It's built to keep you scrolling, spending, achieving, upgrading. It sells you a self and then sells you the tools to fix it. And you buy them because it's easier than standing still and saying, "I don't know who I am." But here's the quiet miracle. You don't need to know who you are to be awake. You don't need a perfect narrative. You don't need an aesthetic. You don't need to brand your soul. You just need to stop long enough to feel the ache. The ache that whispers, "This isn't it." The ache that asks, "What if I've built my life around a ghost?" That ache is not your enemy. It's your invitation. It's the signal that something inside you remembers what it's like to feel true, to feel whole without explanation, to feel present without audience. Psychology has names for these ruptures: cognitive dissonance, dissociation, identity crisis. But what if they aren't disorders? What if they're awakenings? What if they're the first honest crack in the lie? The culture tells you to fix it, to optimize, to hustle your way back into the illusion. But what if you didn't? What if you let it break? What if you let the fracture expand until the false self fell away? It would hurt. It would terrify. It would strip you down. But underneath the rubble, something else waits. Not a better version, a truer one. Not curated, not polished, not postable. Just you. The you that doesn't need to prove. The you that doesn't care about algorithms or audiences or achievement. The you that breathes in silence and knows it is enough. And once you touch that, once you remember, you'll never be the same. You'll still live in this world. You'll still play its games, but you won't believe in them the same way. You'll know they're not who you are. They're just costumes. And sometimes the most radical thing you can do in a world obsessed with identity is to take yours off. Not to disappear, but to remember you were always more than one name could hold. There is a silence beneath all this noise, not the silence of absence, but of origin, the kind of silence that breathes, that holds, that waits for you to notice it again. You have spent so long trying to define yourself, trying to explain your existence into meaning, that you've forgotten what it feels like to simply be. No mission, no performance, no metaphysical resume, just you, breathing, present, alive. And maybe that's not a failure of identity. Maybe it's its final purpose, to carry you here and then dissolve.
You are not a fixed entity. You are a flickering, a movement, a verb mistaken for a noun. The universe did not give you a label. It gave you motion. And you, like everything else that lives, are unfolding. You are not the mask. You are not even the face behind the mask. You are the awareness watching both. Curious, open, wordless. That's the shift, isn't it? The terrifying, beautiful, unmarketable truth. You are not who you think you are. And you never were. You were always something more spacious. Something without boundary. Something that cannot be pointed to because it is the act of pointing itself. You are not in the universe. You are the universe, noticing itself, however briefly, through human eyes. You've been told the self is a fortress to defend. But what if it's a sky to open? What if the purpose of suffering is not to be erased, but to be witnessed so fully that it becomes sacred? What if your contradictions aren't flaws to fix, but doorways to deeper truths? What if freedom doesn't come from choosing better, but from realizing who is doing the choosing? It's here, in this unsteady space, that something ancient stirs. Call it soul, call it witness, call it void, Tao, self, no self. Words only point. They cannot hold it. But you've felt it before. That moment under the stars when you forgot your name and remembered your place in the cosmos. That breath between heartbreaks when something in you softened instead of shattered. That split second of quiet before sleep when a thought passed through you like wind. None of this makes sense. And yet I'm here. That's not coincidence. That's the presence underneath presence. The consciousness that doesn't speak in language, but in stillness. The awareness that watches your thoughts like birds crossing a sky it does not control. You don't have to know who you are. You only have to see that you are. And that seeing, that being, is enough. The self is a story, but you are not just the story. You are the reader. You are the paper. You are the space between words. And maybe this is what the mystics meant. Maybe enlightenment isn't a light bulb moment of clarity. Maybe it's the quiet shift when you realized there was never a you to enlighten, only light seeing itself. You've been living in mirrors, mistaking reflections for reality, but the mirror was never the enemy. It was the invitation to see, to question, to wake. And now you begin to glimpse it, that this isn't about rejecting the self, it's about releasing the need to grip it so tightly. You can still live, still feel, still love, but you do it now with open hands because you are not trying to become something anymore. You are simply letting yourself become. There's no arrival, no ultimate version of you waiting at the end of this process, just deepening, just unfolding, just presence. And in that presence, everything changes without needing to change at all. The same world, but a different view, because you're not looking from the mask anymore. You're looking from the light behind the eyes, not as a character in the dream, but as the dreamer stirring. You've been chasing clarity, hoping for a fixed point. But maybe freedom is not found in the answer. Maybe it's found in the awe of the question itself. You are not broken.
You are breaking open. And what spills out may not be a clean narrative or a branded identity. It may just be the sky, the wind, the witnessing. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough. You wake up again. Same bed, same ceiling, same light spilling through the window. But something is different now. Not in the world, but in you. You move slowly, as if reality has become fragile. You brush your teeth, you make your coffee, but beneath each motion is a stillness that wasn't there before, a kind of witnessing, a quiet awareness that this life, this strange flickering dream you call yours, was never as solid as it seemed. You sit on the edge of your bed and remember. The masks, the mirrors, the maze, the lever, the ship with no original planks, the man inside the Chinese room, the traveller who asked, "What's the lie you live?" And suddenly, you don't need to answer, because the question itself is the key. The lie was never in your actions, it was in your forgetting, in the seamlessness of the performance, in the certainty that the voice narrating your life was the one living it. But now you know better. Now you've touched the silence beneath the voice, the self beneath the self, the part of you that watches, not to judge or fix, but to witness. And that is not small. That is not passive. That is the most sacred thing you possess. Because in a world that begs you to perform, to produce, to prove, choosing to simply be is a radical act. You step outside. The sun rises without your permission. The wind moves through the trees like an old song you almost remember. And you realize you've stopped trying to name everything. You've stopped needing the narrative to make sense. You've stopped needing yourself to make sense. And somehow, in that surrender, you feel more real than ever. Not because you found an answer, but because you made space for the not knowing. That space, the flicker between the thought and the action, the ache and the story, is where your freedom lives. Not in control, not in identity, not in having it all figured out, but in presence. And presence doesn't perform. It watches. It listens. It breathes. So now, the loop closes. You return to where we began. You sit across from someone you love, and their face flickers again. That same strange sliver of unreality. But this time, you don't look away. You don't panic. You don't ask if they're real. Because you understand now. Reality was never the point. Presence was. And in that presence, even the illusion can become sacred. So you let it be. You watch, you listen, you live, not as the character, not as the narrator, but as the light behind the eyes, as the sky behind the weather, as the witness. And that changes everything. Not because the world looks different, but because you do. And maybe that's the final paradox, that you spend your whole life chasing a self only to realize you were never a self to begin with. You were the space in which selves appeared and disappeared like clouds. You were never meant to hold one shape forever. You were meant to shift, to flicker, to dissolve and reform like a dream remembering itself. So ask yourself one last time, what if the lie you live is that there's a you living it? And what if the moment you ask that question, you're already free?
Until next time, stay curious, stay unsettled. LibCurio never closes, and the next chapter awaits.